But notice that through, I don't know if you've ever followed this, where does this money come from that the government is borrowing? We know that individuals will go and buy government bonds, right? We know that corporations buy government bonds. We know that investment funds buy government bonds. And we know that foreign countries buy government bonds, all because they figure it's a good investment that's going to be paid back, plus interest, no matter what. Because it's backed by what they call the full faith and credit of the United States government. And that makes everybody feel kind of warm inside. What is better than the full faith and credit of the United States government? Well, until you think about it, what does that mean? That means the politicians are saying, we promise to pay you back everything we borrow from you plus interest. By golly, we will do it. If we have to tax from you everything you have to do it, we will do it. In other words, you're the backing yourself. The American people is the full faith and credit, not of the government, but the full faith of the people of the United States. And they're going to pay all of that back, but not the government, not the politicians at all. Anyway, so they borrow it from people or institutions. That's my main point here. And that money already exists, does it not? People have saved it, and they buy bonds with it. So consider that for a moment. This is money that's already out there, so where's this inflation come from? It doesn't come from that at all, because no new money is created. It's just being turned over as loans and interest and so on. But now, the truth of the matter is that they never can borrow enough in that fashion. There's always a shortfall. And it's the shortfall that gets interesting. When I started to do this research, the shortfall was about 7%. In other words, 7% of the money that the government needed back in 1994, 1993, when I was looking at the statistics, they could not borrow from the private sector at all. It wasn't there. They would have had to raise interest rates considerably to attract that additional 7%. They did not want to raise interest rates. And so what do? Well, they just walked down the street to the Federal Reserve System. Now, put a pause on that for a second. Today, I don't know what the shortfall is, because I have not seen the statistics. They're not publishing the statistics. Can you imagine that? And but my guess is that the shortfall today is running about 30 to 40%. And I'm thinking that the way things are currently going, that probably by this time next year it could be 50, 60, maybe 70% shortfall. So where does that shortfall come from? Back to our little scenario. Let's say that the Treasury official walks down the street to the Federal Reserve building. And he walks in there, and the president of the Federal Reserve branch says, good evening, sir, or good morning, sir, but won't you come in? We've been expecting you. They arrive there every day. They want money. He says, come into my office. So, now, mind you, this is all fictional. It doesn't really happen this way. These loans are made quickly with a phone call or maybe an email or some kind of a protected internet exchange, and it's all done with keystrokes on a computer today. But anyway, just to keep it clear in our minds, imagine the Treasury official walks into the Federal Reserve building and said, sit down, sir, how much money do you want today? And the Treasury official would say, well, another $1 trillion today would be just about right. That isn't going till noon tomorrow. And so the Federal Reserve guy says, all right, no problem, sir. And he opens up this big desk drawer, pulls out the big black checkbook, and he writes a check to the United States government for $1 trillion, signs it, hands it to the Treasury official, thank you very much. Out he goes, down the street, deposits the $1 trillion check into the bank account of the government, and now the government has $1 trillion. Didn't have to come from the private sector at all. It came from the Federal Reserve System. Now, the question is, where did that money come from? What account did the Federal Reserve have? Who put the money in there? And the amazing answer is that there is no account, there's no money, there's nothing. That money is just created out of thin air. It just comes from heaven. And, if you and I were to do this, we would go to jail very fast. But they can do it because Congress wants them to do it. Think about that. The politicians really don't ever have to worry about what anything costs. They can vote trillions and trillions of dollars for health care, Social Security benefits, for stimulus packages. They can conduct wars, 97 wars all at once, whatever it costs. Do they care? Why should they care? Whatever the shortfall is, they can go to the Federal Reserve System and by agreement, this is a partnership. By a partnership agreement, the Fed will create that money out of thin air and give it to the government in the pretext of loaning it to them. But they didn't really loan it, they just created it for the government. It's the same mechanism that in the old days would be done by turning on the printing presses. Just printing the money. Well, there's too much of it now to work that way. People are used to checkbook money now and computer money, so hauling all of that paper money around would be very inconvenient. So it never sees the light of paper money. Less than 3% of all the money in circulation is in coin and currency. All the rest is digital. But it's money nevertheless. And so that's just created out of thin air. And it goes into the economy. And the politicians don't have to worry about it at all. So that's why they're in it. Now, let's take it to the next step. See why the banks are in it. Let's take $10,000. No, let's make it simpler. Let's take $1,000 of that huge amount of money that was created for the Fed and trace it. Let's say it's given to a fellow that delivers our mail. The postal worker gets a $1,000 check from the federal government, and now he's got it in his hand, nothing better than a government check. It's good money. So he takes it down the street to his bank, the private bank where his account is, and he makes a deposit into his checking account. Now that money is out of the Federal Reserve government side of the partnership and into the private banking side of the partnership as a deposit into the banking system. Here's what happens. If I were the president of that bank, I could stand up in front of the room there where all the people are lined up at the windows, and I could say, "Attention everybody, excuse me, I'm the president of the bank, and I want to tell you, we have some good news. This gentleman over here just deposited $1,000 into our venerable bank, and we now have money to loan." And that's good news because a lot of people are in the banks to borrow money, and they know that the more money that the banks have to loan, usually the lower the interest rate. So that's all good news. But perhaps this lady over here would say, "Did you say $1,000? Yeah. So, well, I guess you can't help me because I want to buy a used car to take the kids to school, and I need $9,000. I need to borrow $9,000. And I guess you can't help me. I'll go somewhere else." And if I were a really good bank president, I would say, "Excuse me, ma'am, don't worry about that. Just take a seat at my desk. I'll be with you in a minute." And if she would say, "But you said $1,000 and I want $9, you can't loan me $9 on the basis of $9 on the basis of $1, and I would say, "Do you want the money or not?" And the truth of the matter is that after you consider all the bells and whistles and all the complicated accounting and all the delaying actions, you get it all condensed down to one formula. The answer is yes, I can loan $9,000 to her on the basis of the $1,000 from him, and when I'm all done, I still got his $1,000 in the vault. That's called fractional reserve banking, and it's the way banks have been operating for hundreds of years. They don't have to have anything in the vault to loan you money. They just create it out of nothing in terms of a ratio. Fractional reserve meaning they only have to have a fraction of the amount that they loan. And the Federal Reserve System has had for many years a fraction formula. Says that the banks can loan any amount of money provided they have 10% of that amount in reserve in their vault or on their accounting records as a reserve of some kind. So as a bank president, all I have to do is take his $1,000 and put it under a column, a piece of paper, and I write at the top, it says reserve. Okay, $1,000 reserve, that's good. Now let's see, I can loan $10,000 and still have 10% reserve. So I can now create the other $9,000 out of thin air. That's basically how it works when you boil all the mechanisms down to a simple formula.